There is a rule in American special operations that almost no one discusses outside of certain rooms in certain buildings that do not appear on any public map. When an operator is declared killed in action, the paperwork is filed, the flag is folded, the family is notified, and that person ceases to exist in any operational capacity. Almost always, that finality is real. Almost always. The woman standing at the UAV control console at 4:47 in the morning held her tablet with three fingers braced along the base, her thumb and index fingers supporting the edge. It was a small thing. Most people would not notice it. Master Chief Roy Callum noticed it from across the room before he noticed anything else about her. He had served in the United States Navy for 43 years. He had passed through Fort Bragg in 1984 on a temporary assignment he was not permitted to discuss even now. He had stood in rooms where decisions were made that altered the course of events in places most Americans had never heard of. He had developed over those 4 decades a reliable and well-calibrated instinct for recognizing when something did not add up. The woman at the console did not add up. He watched her authenticate the encryption protocols on the UAV system. The monthly codes required most operators 5 to 7 minutes in frequent reference to the manual. She completed the process in under 10 seconds. No hesitation, no manual. Her fingers moved with the flat certainty of muscle memory, the kind that gets drilled into you in places where making a mistake means someone dies. Callum set his pen against the maintenance log he was pretending to review. He did not look up. He did not change his expression. But his jaw tightened and he reached into his breast pocket and removed a small notebook. Not a tablet, not a phone, just a spiral-bound notebook he had carried for 30 years. And he wrote 2 words at the top of a fresh page. He underlined them once. Then he went back to pretending to review the maintenance log. Her name, according to her contractor ID, was Elise Carver, technical consultant cleared for non-combat systems. The paperwork was immaculate. It had to be because getting here required documentation that could survive any level of scrutiny. She had been on base for 3 months, which meant she had already survived the first wave of background checks, the second wave and the informal social scrutiny that on any military installation is often more thorough than either. She had survived it by being invisible, not literally. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall with dark hair pulled into a regulation bun and eyes the color of deep water on a cloudy day. She was not invisible because she was unremarkable. She was invisible because she had spent 12 years learning exactly how to make people look through her rather than at her, how to occupy space without claiming it, how to exist in a room full of people who needed to believe she was the least important person present. 3 months in, they believed it completely. She had heard every variation of the joke by now. The coffee girl, the IT mouse, the contractor who must have gotten her clearance through some procurement officer's personal favor. She had eaten lunch alone in the corner of the enlisted dining facility, while people at other tables assembled increasingly elaborate versions of her incompetence into stories that were more entertaining than accurate. She breathed through all of it. 4 counts in through the nose. Hold. 4 counts out. Hold. They taught that pattern at certain schools. The ones where they break you down to discover what remains when everything else has been stripped away. The ones where the curriculum is classified and the graduation rate is a number most people would not believe. She had graduated. She breathed through the jokes and the dismissals in the 3 months of being furniture. And every evening, she returned to her small concrete room in the contractor housing unit and opened her encrypted tablet and added more pieces to the picture she was building. 26 operators had died in the past 14 months because someone at this installation had been selling classified tactical intelligence to private military contractors, not leaking it carelessly, selling it deliberately, packaging it with professional precision, timing the releases to maximize operational damage while maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. Whoever was running this understood military information architecture at an expert level, which meant it was someone senior, which meant she needed to be careful and patient and completely invisible until she had enough to end it. She was getting close. She was running a diagnostic on the Reaper feed at 5:15 in the morning when the door opened and the corridor filled with broad shoulders and noise. There were 8 of them. Navy SEALs moving through the narrow hallway with the confidence of men who had been told repeatedly and had come to deeply believe that they were the apex predators of modern warfare. They moved like men who had never been required to question that belief. At their center stood Admiral Douglas Harlan. He was 54 years old with silver eagles on his collar and the kind of physical presence assembled through decades of training and the authority that comes from commanding rooms where everyone treats your words as final. His arms were crossed. His eyes moved across the control room with the proprietary ease of a man who owned not just this space, but the ocean visible through the windows beyond it. His eyes landed on Elise. Something shifted in his expression, not suspicion. The recognition of a category, the category of person who did not belong. Well now, his voice carried easily pitched for his audience rather than for the room. Who is this coffee girl for the real soldiers? The laughter came instantly. 8 men finding their cue and hitting it the way men do when they need to signal alignment with the most powerful person present. Elise did not flinch. She did not turn immediately. She counted 4 beats. Finished the keystroke she was in the middle of. Saved her work with the encryption sequence. Then she turned her head slowly. No rush, no panic, her hands still resting on the keyboard with the stillness of someone who has learned to separate her body's performance from whatever is happening inside it. She looked at Harlan. He was smiling the smile designed to invite everyone else to join the smile that said, this was entertainment. This was the natural order of things being confirmed in public. Higher than yours, sir. Her voice was quiet, each word placed with deliberate care. You just don't know it yet. The corridor went silent. Someone coughed. A boot scuffed tile. The air conditioning became the loudest thing in the room. Then Harlan threw his head back and laughed. The kind of laugh that rewrites a moment into something manageable, that invites everyone to agree on an interpretation before anyone has time to form their own. His team joined in, nervous at first, then louder. Cute. He stepped into the control room, leaning against the doorframe with the ease of a man who had never been told he couldn't go somewhere. Real cute. Maybe I'll find you a uniform after you shine my boots. She turned back to her screen. Her breathing followed its pattern. Steady. Each count a small act of sustained discipline. In the corner, Callum had not moved. He was watching her now, cataloging the way she handled the moment, the absence of residual tension in her shoulders, the absence of any adjustment to signal anything to anyone. She had simply returned to her work with the economy of someone who had already determined this moment did not warrant more of her attention than she had given it. That was not civilian behavior. That was not even standard military. He had seen it before in people who had passed through certain programs and come out the other side with the understanding that the mission was always the priority and everything else was noise to be processed and released. He wrote 3 more words in his notebook and underlined them twice. Lieutenant Declan Foss had the kind of ambition that expressed itself most visibly through other people's subordination. He was 28 years old, recently promoted, deeply attentive to the social dynamics of the installation because he had understood from the beginning that advancement in hierarchical systems depends on visible alignment with the right people. He had aligned himself with Harlan with the thoroughness of someone who had studied the man's preferences and never deviated from them. He delivered the mid-morning message with the satisfaction of someone who had been given a task perfectly suited to his current sense of himself. Admiral's orders. He leaned against the console she had briefly vacated. You're not authorized for this terminal during operational hours. I'm running system diagnostics. Need that to stop, now. She saved her work, logged off, gathered her tablet and tools. She moved without hurry, which Foss found mildly frustrating because he had arrived prepared for argument and she was declining to provide it. You know what the problem is? He was talking to her back. Civilians don't understand hierarchy, don't understand what it means to earn your place in an organization like this. We spend years training, bleeding, proving ourselves. Then someone like you walks in with a piece of paper. She paused at the door. You're right, Lieutenant, she said. I don't understand that at all. The calm agreement threw off his rhythm entirely. He finished the conversation alone, talking to a door that was already closing, and afterward pulled out his phone and opened the group chat. Guys, you're not going to believe this. By dinner, the story had traveled across the entire installation. By the following morning, everyone knew about the contractor who had told Admiral Harlan she outranked him. The story had improved in the retelling, as stories do, funnier, more dramatic, more confirming of existing beliefs about the natural order of things. She had heard 3 different versions of her own story before noon. She ate lunch alone and listened and filed everything away. The dead drop took exactly 6 minutes. CDR Elliott Vance, Director of Information Systems, was 45 years old and looked closer to 60, a man carrying the specific exhaustion of 2 decades spent hunting vulnerabilities in systems that were outdated when he inherited them. Competent, methodical, entirely unaware of what was actually happening in his office twice each month. They spent 10 minutes discussing firewall updates and patch scheduling. It was genuinely tedious. She gave it her full attention. Then Vance stood, rubbed his eyes, and said he was getting coffee. The door clicked shut. She moved to his computer, navigated 3 directory layers to the folder she had seeded 6 weeks earlier, created a new file disguised as a routine system log, and transferred 3 weeks of compiled data. Access patterns, timestamp anomalies. User IDs present in the system but absent from any official personnel roster. Upload complete, local copies deleted. Recent file history cleared. She was back in her chair when Vance returned at 6 minutes and 14 seconds, carrying 2 cups of government contract coffee that tasted as it always did, like it had been processed through something that had already had a long and difficult life. "Changed my mind," he said, handing her one. "Figured you could use it." She accepted it and said thank you and drank without expression. By nightfall, the data would be on a server at Fort Meade, Maryland, where someone with considerably more institutional authority than anyone at this installation would read it and make decisions she was not yet cleared to know about. She had done this 11 times in 3 months. Each time the picture sharpened. The anomaly appeared at 3:07 in the morning. She found it while reviewing deep architecture authentication logs late that evening, the kind of access audit that most systems administrators never ran, because most systems administrators did not know it existed. It was buried in the telemetry small enough to read as background noise, formatted to look like automated sync data. Except it wasn't. Someone had logged into the system remotely at 3:07 a.m., accessed a specific cluster of files, extracted a small volume of data, a few kilobytes precisely calibrated, and logged back out. The access was clean. The entry and exit were professionally executed, designed to evade automated flagging by someone who understood the flagging parameters from the inside. The IP address traced back to Admiral Harlan's office terminal. She photographed the screen. Encrypted storage chain of custody documentation built to survive legal scrutiny. Then she sat back and looked at the data again. Something was wrong with it. Not with the data itself, the data was real. But the readability of it, the way it sat in the logs like a deliberate signature, did not match the operational profile she had spent 3 months assembling for whoever was running this. A person who had transferred classified intelligence for 8 months without triggering any conventional detection channel had demonstrated discipline that did not produce this kind of visible trace. Not unless the visible trace was intentional. Not unless someone wanted Harlan to look guilty. She saved the file and returned to her work, and the question of why someone would construct that particular frame settled into the back of her mind and stayed there patient and persistent, refusing to be set aside. The morning that changed everything looked from the outside like any other morning. She was back in the control room at 5 a.m. The overnight operator had gone to breakfast, relieved to be relieved. She had the room to herself, servers humming cooling fans, cycling the recycled air smell of every institutional space that has been sealed against the outside world for too long. She was cross-referencing the 307 access against the broader pattern when CWO Garrett Pruitt walked in with a maintenance bag over his shoulder and stopped when he saw her. Pruitt was 45, precise in his movements, with the focused attention of a man who maintained systems that could not afford to fail, and had developed the habit of noticing when things did not behave as they were designed to behave. He had first noticed at least 3 weeks ago. He had been watching since adding observations to a quiet assessment he had not yet acted on. That assessment had just reached its conclusion. "What are you doing?" Not quite a question. "System diagnostics. There's an access anomaly from last night that you're not authorized for security reviews. I'm checking system integrity. The authentication logs are administrative records, not classified materials." He stepped closer and looked at the screen. He recognized what he was seeing and recognized that her ability to read it at this level was not consistent with the access profile of a technical contractor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Log off," he said. "Now." She saved her work, logged off, stood. "Chief Pruitt, if someone on this installation is compromising classified systems, wouldn't you want to know? What I want is to not explain to my commanding officer why a contractor is running security audits at 5 in the morning. His hand was already on his radio. There was nothing more to say. She gathered her equipment and left. Harlan found her in the enlisted dining facility at 06:15. The performance from the previous morning was gone, replaced by something colder and more deliberate. He sat across from her without invitation, with the stillness of a man who has decided the situation has moved past the point where charm is useful. "Still here," he said. She looked up from her oatmeal. "Still here, sir. I heard you were in the control room. Oh, 500. Running diagnostics. I don't remember requesting diagnostics at 5 in the morning." He leaned forward slightly. "What I remember is telling you specifically to stay away from tactical systems. What I remember is making it clear that your role on this installation is limited and defined. The logs I was reviewing aren't tactical. They're administrative access records, which you have no authorization to review. He held her gaze. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to finish your breakfast. Then you're going to pack your equipment. And if you're very fortunate, we won't pursue charges for the attempted data breach. I haven't breached any data. Chief Pruitt says otherwise. He pulled out his radio. The MPs arrived in under 3 minutes. Body armor, sidearms, the full physical presence of institutional authority made concrete. She stood when they asked, placed her hands behind her back. When they asked, felt the zip ties settle against her wrists with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. The dining facility had gone completely silent. 50 people watching a contractor being escorted out. Someone took a photograph. The image, she estimated, had already been sent to a dozen group chats before they reached the door. She breathed steadily the entire way. 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold. Cell 3 was 8 by 10 feet. Concrete walls, metal bench, a small window near the ceiling that showed nothing but a rectangle of lightning sky. They cut the zip ties, logged her equipment, tablet, phone, tools, contractor, ID, and locked the door. The watch stayed on her wrist. No one thought to check it. She sat on the metal bench with her back against the wall and ran through what she knew. The 307 access was a frame. She was increasingly certain of it. The question was who had constructed it and why, and what it meant about the architecture of the operation she had been sent to dismantle. A frame required access to Harlan's authentication credentials. Biometric authentication, fingerprint, retinal scan meant physical proximity to his terminal or the administrative authority to enroll substitute credentials. The number of people with that kind of access was small. The number of people who also had knowledge of this investigation was smaller. The name that kept arriving at the end of that logic was not Harlan's. She looked at the watch. On the side, barely visible at a small button recessed into the casing. 3 months she had carried it without touching it. Protocol said do not activate unless absolutely necessary. Protocol also said trust your assessment when the parameters of the mission have shifted beyond what the original plan anticipated. She studied the button. Not yet. She had until 1600. He came at 1420 earlier than she expected. Master Chief Roy Callum moved through the holding facility corridor with the unhurried authority of a man who had outlasted several generations of command structure and had long since stopped needing anyone's permission to be anywhere. No one stopped him. No one would have considered it. He pulled a plastic chair to the outside of the cell door and sat down. He was carrying his notebook, the spiral-bound one, the one she had first seen him write in the morning they were in the same room. He set it on his knee and looked at her through the wire mesh with the direct patience of someone who has decided to stop waiting. 43 years, he said. You learn to recognize patterns. She watched him. I've been keeping notes. He put one hand flat on the cover. 6 months. Things that didn't square. Access patterns that seemed off. Supply requests I couldn't find in the official logs. Personnel departing the installation without paperwork that matched the timeline. He paused. I reported some of it 3 years ago, through the correct channels to the appropriate people. He let a beat pass. The man I reported it to made Admiral 2 years later. The air conditioning hummed. Outside the small window, a jet crossed the sky, the sound arriving after the aircraft had already gone. I don't know who you are, Callum said. I don't know what you're doing here, or who sent you, but I know the difference between someone who got lost and someone who knows exactly where they're standing. He opened the notebook and turned it so she could read through the mesh. The handwriting was precise, dated, organized into categories that anyone trained in intelligence assessment would recognize immediately. He had been doing this for 6 months independently on paper from a completely different vantage point than her own investigation. The observations overlapped in places. In other places, they filled gaps she had not yet closed. I'm prepared to testify, he said, whenever it comes to that. He closed the notebook and stood. I went through Bragg in '84, he said. Different program than whatever you went through. But I understand what the training asks of a person. And I understand what 3 months of what you've been doing asks of a person. He looked at her with the directness of someone who considers that quality a form of respect. Carry it right. He walked back down the corridor without looking back, and the sound of his footsteps faded into the baseline hum of the installation, and she was alone again with the concrete walls and the narrow window, and the name that kept arriving at the end of her logic. She looked at the watch. 14:38. 1 hour and 22 minutes. She closed her eyes and breathed, and in the breathing she ran the whole case again from the beginning, looking not for what she had found, but for what she had missed until the shape of it resolved into something that was worse than what she had been sent here to find and also finally complete. Wren came for the first time at 1510. Commander Thaddeus Wren had been running base security for 4 years, long enough to develop a precise sense of when a situation was more complicated than its surface suggested. He carried a file folder that he had already memorized and sat on the bench outside her cell with the expression of a man who had come prepared to verify rather than to confirm. "Walk me through it," he said. "Walk me through what specifically?" "Start with YO 500. Lower system traffic. Diagnostic data is cleaner with minimal active users. You accessed user authentication logs. Administrative records, not classified materials." Chief Pruitt characterized what he observed as a security audit. Chief Pruitt is technically proficient. He recognized what I was examining. His characterization of my authorization level is incorrect. Wren opened the folder. "These logs show you specifically targeting files with access patterns originating from Admiral Harlan's office terminal. The logs show me reviewing anomalous access patterns that happen to originate from that terminal. Those are not the same thing. Explain the difference." "I found a remote login at 3:07 a.m. Small data extraction. Clean exit. The IP is registered to his office." She held his gaze. "But the access pattern is wrong. Someone has been running this operation for 8 months without triggering any conventional detection channel. A person with that discipline doesn't leave a trail this readable." Wren looked up from the folder he wasn't really reading. "Unless they want it found," he said. "Yes." He sat with that for a moment. The calculation behind his eyes was visible in the way careful men allow calculations to surface when they are deciding whether to trust something that contradicts what they walked into a room believing. Who would have access to his authentication credentials? Someone with physical proximity to his terminal, or someone with administrative-level system access granted by a person with the authority to issue it? Someone who understood the system from the inside. She paused. Someone who also had prior knowledge of this investigation. That's a very short list. Yes. Give me the name at the end of your logic. She looked at him steadily. What I'm about to tell you will require verification through channels above your current clearance level to access directly. You'll need to make that request immediately, before 1600. Why 1600? Because at 1600 my check-in window closes and what happens after that is outside my control. Wren checked his watch. 46 minutes. "The name," he said. "General Aldous Merritt." Wren picked up his folder and left without another word. She heard his footsteps moving quickly down the corridor, not running but close, and the sound of a door opening and closing somewhere at the far end of the building. Pruitt came at midday. He moved through the corridor with the deliberate economy of a man who had made a decision before he arrived and was not going to spend time arriving at it again. He pulled a chair to the outside of the cell and sat without preamble. For a moment he said nothing. He looked at her the way technically precise people examine anomalies, not with hostility, but with the focused attention of someone running a diagnosis on something that should not be behaving the way it is. 3 weeks ago, he said, that's when I first noticed you weren't what your ID indicated. The way you held the equipment, the authentication speed, the specific files you accessed, and the sequence you used. He paused. I told myself it was probably an exceptionally experienced contractor. Someone who'd absorbed the habits from extended field work. She waited. I don't think that anymore. What do you think now, Chief Pruitt? He was quiet for a moment. Then, I think whatever you were doing in that control room this morning that was more important than what I reported, and I think reporting it was the wrong call. She held his gaze. If there's a genuine security concern on this installation, would you want to know about it? The questions sat between them with the weight of questions that are not really questions. Pruitt replaced the chair against the wall, and walked back down the corridor without another word. He did not call for additional personnel. He did not file a supplemental report. He left the conversation where it had ended, which was she recognized its own kind of answer. At 1547, Declan Foss was alone in the secondary operations room with a terminal and a direct order from Admiral Harlan. The task was clear: pull every access log file, timestamp, and system interaction associated with the contractor's ID for the past 3 months. Build the evidentiary record. Document the unauthorized access. Make the case clean enough that when it concluded in only one possible direction. Foss understood this. He was thorough by nature, and thorough was exactly what was needed. So he pulled the first layer of logs, then the second, then the third, because thorough meant third layers too. The third layer was where the problem was. A parallel access sequence running alongside the primary pattern he had been assigned to document. Same files, same operational data, different credentials. A different user authenticating with an account that carried a clearance level Foss had never personally encountered in 4 years of working with sensitive systems. The timestamps preceded Harlan's access, consistently, by intervals ranging from 4 hours to 2 days, as if someone had been reviewing the files before Harlan reviewed them, as if someone had been selecting which files to route toward him. Foss stopped. He looked at the screen for a long moment, then he closed the tab. He sat in the empty room with the closed tab and the server hum, in the particular silence that descends when a person realizes that the ground beneath what they believed was solid has shifted in a direction they did not anticipate. He opened the tab again. The data was still there. He looked at the name attached to the credentials. He looked at the clearance level. He understood with sudden and complete clarity that he was looking at the architecture of something that extended well beyond an admiral's misconduct and well beyond a contractor's unauthorized access. He understood that he had 3 choices. He could close the tab, delete his recent file history, complete the assignment as given, and never mention this to anyone. Safe, career-preserving. The kind of choice that gets made every day by people who tell themselves they are being pragmatic. He could report it to Harlan, which would make everything significantly worse in ways he was only beginning to map. Or he could do something that required him to admit he had been wrong about something important and to act on that admission before the window closed. He looked at the time, 15:52. He thought about the woman in cell 3. He thought about the way she had said, "You're right, Lieutenant," without a trace of defensiveness, as if his opinion of her was information she had already processed and assigned its appropriate weight. He thought about 3 months of jokes in the group chat and the easy pleasure of having a target that didn't push back. He printed the relevant pages, folded them, put them in his breast pocket. Then he walked to the holding facility. She heard him before the door opened. She was sitting on the bench with her back against the wall when Foss appeared outside the cell, and she looked at him without surprise, which he would think about later, the absence of surprise in the eyes of someone who had been sitting in a holding cell for 9 hours. "I found something," he said, pulling the logs for the Admiral. She waited. Secondary access pattern, same files, credentials belonging to a general-level account. He touched his breast pocket without meaning to. The timestamps precede Harlan's access, consistently, over an extended period, as if someone was pointing him toward the right files. "Yes, a beat. I printed it." She looked at the watch. 15:58. "Listen carefully," she said. "In approximately 2 minutes, a protocol is going to activate that changes the operational status of this entire installation. When it does, I need you to stay close and do exactly what I tell you in the order I tell you. Can you do that?" Foss thought about the 3 months, the group chat, the performance of contempt he had delivered daily to a person he had never actually looked at. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She nodded once. 1600 arrived. At Fort Meade, Maryland, an encrypted monitoring system registered a missed check-in at exactly 16:07. The system had been designed for precisely this contingency. A missed check-in from a sovereign ghost asset in an active deep cover environment did not require human authorization to escalate. It required only the absence of a signal that had been present without interruption for 93 consecutive days. 4 simultaneous processes initiated. The first notified General Patricia Holt, who was in a secure conference room at the Pentagon and read the alert on her phone with an expression that did not change. The second dispatched a verification request to the installation's commanding officer, an email that would arrive in Admiral Harlan's inbox and that he would never read. The third created encrypted backups of every piece of data that Elise Carver had transferred to Fort Meade over the preceding 3 months, distributing them across 4 classified servers in 3 geographic locations, making them impervious to destruction or alteration from any single point of access. The fourth requested 4 Black Hawk helicopters from the nearest available command transport unit with full authorization for immediate departure to Naval Station Pearl Harbor. Estimated arrival 68 minutes. She heard the rotors before anyone else in the holding facility did. They were faint at first, the way distant aircraft always sound over Pearl Harbor, where the sky above a major naval installation is never truly empty. But there was something in the frequency, in the specific grouping of sound, that she recognized from the many times she had been inside a deployment like this rather than on the receiving end of one. 4 birds. Formation. Command configuration. She stood. Outside the cell, Foss was still there. He had the look of a man who had made a decision and was now waiting for the consequences, which was, she thought, exactly what he was. "That's the signal," she said. "Get my equipment from processing. All of it." He looked at the MP on desk duty, who had also heard the rotors and was already standing. "Do it," Foss said. The walk from the holding facility to the main control room took 4 minutes at a normal pace. They covered it in 3. The rotors were fully audible now, the percussive weight of 4 heavy transport aircraft descending with a purposefulness felt in the chest before it was understood by the mind. Personnel across the installation were stopping in courtyards and corridors to look at the sky. Training schedules were pausing. The daily machinery of the base was developing at its edges, the hesitation of a system encountering something outside its anticipated parameters. Harlan was already in the control room. He had gone to the place where he felt most in command. He stood at the central console with his hands flat on the surface, surrounded by the officers who moved toward authority in moments of uncertainty. Pruitt was there. Wren was near the door. Several duty officers whose roles in what was coming were still being determined. Harlan turned when the door opened. When he saw her walking in without restraints, with Foss behind her, and her equipment returned, his face moved through surprise, then recalculation, then the deliberate reassembly of authority over a face that had just shown something it was not supposed to show. "What is this?" he said. "This is the part where we finish it," she said. She moved to the nearest terminal, authenticated with credentials the system recognized without hesitation, and activated the audit-wide protocol she had pre-positioned 3 weeks earlier in a directory no one on this installation knew existed. The system began to run. Data populated across multiple screens simultaneously: file access records, transfer, timestamps, authentication logs, the full pattern of 3 months assembled into something that was visible to everyone in the room at once. Green for normal, yellow for anomalous, red for violations. There was a great deal of red, most of it traced to a single set of credentials. "You need to log off that terminal," Harlan said. His command register had returned, but something beneath it had shifted a hollowness where the foundation had been. "You are in a restricted system under active detention." "My detention was ordered by you," she said, not looking up, "for accessing administrative logs documenting unauthorized data transfers originating from your office credentials. I'd like to discuss what those logs actually show." The screens continued filling. A correlation window opened every instance of Harlan accessing a specific subset of tactical files cross-referenced against the operational reports of missions that failed within 72 hours of that access. Each correlation highlighted, timestamped, documented with the granularity of evidence built to survive adversarial scrutiny. The percentage climbed as the analysis completed: 71, 84, 92. Pruitt's voice was flat, mechanical, the voice of a man delivering a finding he had verified 3 times before saying it. "Sir, every time you accessed this specific cluster of files, a corresponding operation failed within 72 hours. The statistical correlation is not explainable as coincidence." Harlan looked at the screen, looked at the numbers, looked at her. "You built this," he said. "Not an accusation, a recognition." Through the reinforced windows, the first Black Hawk descended below the tree line, its running lights steady in the early evening air. Then the second, the third and fourth together in the paired configuration used for command presence rather than transport. Everyone in the room looked at the windows. The only sounds were the rotors and the servers and the quiet, continuous work of an audit system assembling its findings into something that would not be walked back. Harlan looked at the helicopters, looked at the screens, looked at her. She held his gaze and let him understand, in whatever order the understanding needed to arrive, what the next hour required of him. Outside, the rotors slowed. The doors opened. Wren had not spoken since the audit protocol activated. He stood near the secondary terminal with the expression of a man processing the distance between what he had been given to understand and what was currently on the screens. It was considerable distance. He had received the name Merritt from Elise 40 minutes ago and had made a phone call that connected him to a clearance level he had not previously encountered. The information from that conversation had reorganized his understanding of the past several hours in ways he was still working through. He looked at the correlation data, at the red, at the numbers still climbing. He looked at Elise. She met his eyes briefly, not acknowledgement exactly, more the recognition that he was carrying something that deserved to be carried correctly. He nodded once. A single precise movement that contained the full weight of what it represented, the acknowledgement that he had come within a decision of shutting this down, the acknowledgement that he hadn't, the acknowledgement that the difference between those two things was not a small one. She had already turned back to the screens. The 4 generals walked through the control room door at 17:04. They wore service dress, immaculate, precise assembled, with the care of people who understand that the uniform is also a document, that what you wear into a room makes a record alongside everything else that happens there. General Patricia Holt led them. She was 58 years old, silver hair in a tight regulation knot, with eyes that functioned as instruments rather than windows calibrated to measure rather than reveal. She had spent 31 years walking into rooms that had gone wrong and identifying with the precision of long practice the exact nature and extent of the wrongness before anyone present had finished deciding how to explain it to her. She had read the Fort Meade analysis twice on the flight over. She knew what she was walking into. She walked in anyway with the same quality of forward movement she had used her entire career. Not aggressive, not theatrical, simply absolute. The kind of motion that does not pause to consider whether the room is ready for it. Her gaze moved across the room systematically. Harlan at the console, hands flat on the surface, his face holding the expression of a man who has run out of available interpretations. Wren near the door, carrying the careful neutralities of someone who has just been proven correct about something he had hoped he was wrong about. Pruitt at a secondary terminal, his technical precision confronting a situation that exceeded the parameters it had been trained for. Foss near the wall, standing straight, hands at his sides, wearing the expression of a young officer who has just made the most consequential decision of his career and does not yet know whether it was right. And at the central terminal, her back to the door, hands on the keyboard, running the audit that was still populating across 4 screens, Elise Carver. Holt stopped. The room stopped with her. Elise turned from the terminal. She looked at Holt across 12 feet of control room floor, and something passed between them that required no translation for anyone present who had served long enough to understand what it meant when two people recognize the weight the other has been carrying. Holt raised her hand. The salute was precise, unhurried, given with the full formality of the gesture as a mark of respect between equals, stripped of hierarchy, reduced to its original meaning. The room came apart, not loudly, but the sound that moved through it, the sharp, simultaneous intake of breath, the scrape of Pruitt's chair, something hitting the floor near the door, had the character of a physical event, the character of pressure finding its release. Foss's mouth opened. He was not aware of it. Wren's hand, which had been drifting toward his sidearm, in the reflexive preparation of a security officer operating on insufficient information, stopped and did not continue. Pruitt leaned back from his terminal as if something had pushed him. Harlan made a sound, not a word. The involuntary exhalation of a man whose certainty has collapsed faster than his body can process the collapse. The compressed weight of everything he had believed about this situation and himself exiting through the only opening available. The 3 generals behind Holt came to attention simultaneously. 3 salutes given without hesitation in the manner of people who had been waiting for the correct moment and had recognized it. Elise returned them. The change in her posture was not dramatic. It was not the movie version of revelation, no theatrical straightening, no performance of recovered identity. It was something quieter and more durable than that. She simply stopped performing the contractor and stood as the officer, and the difference between the two was immediately legible to everyone in the room with enough experience to read it. Commander Carver, Holt's voice carried without volume. Welcome back. General Holt, thank you for the response time. We've been monitoring since the check-in lapse. When the lockdown protocol triggered, we moved immediately. Holt's gaze shifted to Harlan. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Admiral Douglas Harlan, I'm General Patricia Holt, Joint Special Operations Command. You are being placed under arrest for violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, specifically unauthorized disclosure of classified information, conspiracy to commit espionage, and conduct unbecoming an officer. This is fabricated. His voice had recovered some of its register, but the foundation underneath it was gone. Someone planted that data. The biometric authentication. The biometric authentication includes fingerprint and retinal verification with timestamped access from your personal terminal. Pruitt delivered it the way he delivered everything technical, precisely without inflection, as a finding rather than an accusation. Then someone compromised my biometrics. Someone with the access and the technical capability to show him, Elise said. Foss moved to the secondary terminal. His hands were steadier than they had any right to be. He pulled the correlation analysis and displayed it across the main screen. The percentage was at 92, sir. Pruitt again, the same flat delivery. Every time you access this specific subset of tactical files, a corresponding operation failed within 72 hours. The correlation is statistically impossible to explain as coincidence. Harlan looked at the numbers. He looked at the documentation assembled across 4 screens, 3 months of access logs, transfer records, authentication, timestamps. The careful architecture of a case built by someone who understood it would be tested. He looked at Elise. "You built this," he said. The second time he had said it. This time it meant something different. 3 months, she said. Every access log, every timestamp, every transfer, all of it documented in systems you didn't know existed, designed to preserve evidence from exactly the kind of administrative interference that makes institutional corruption viable. She paused. "But there's something else. Something the audit found that you should hear." She looked at Foss. He stepped forward, unfolded the printed pages, and laid them on the central console. "When I was pulling the access logs per the Admiral's order," he said, "I found a secondary pattern, parallel access sequence, general-level credentials. Same files as the Admiral's access trail, but the timestamps precede his access consistently. Hours, sometimes days." He placed his finger on the relevant column, as if someone was reviewing the files before the Admiral accessed them, selecting which ones to route toward him. Holt looked at the pages. "Name on the credentials." Foss said, "General Aldous Merritt, ma'am." The name landed with the weight of a name that carries institutional consequence. General Aldous Merritt was not an abstraction to anyone in the room. He was a decorated officer, 30 years of distinguished service, a senior position on the Operational Oversight Committee that had, among other things, authorized the deep cover investigation currently standing at the central terminal of this control room. One of the generals behind Holt exchanged a look with the one beside him. Holt said, "Explain the full connection, Commander." Elise said, "Merritt recommended me for Sovereign Ghost. He designed the operational parameters. He knew the check-in window, the cover identity, the timeline, and the specific access protocols I would be pursuing." She paused. "He also accessed the intelligence briefing for my convoy in Afghanistan 2 hours before we moved. He modified the threat assessment and altered the route. He formatted it as updated intelligence, the kind of adjustment a commanding officer makes when new information warrants it." The room was very still. "My convoy drove into a prepared ambush on a road he had marked clear. 11 people died." She let that stand. "He tried to kill me. When that failed and I survived without immediate identification, he recognized the opportunity. A deceased operator with no institutional footprint is the ideal instrument for a deep cover investigation. He recommended me specifically because he understood that I would pursue the access patterns, find the evidence against Harlan, and bring it to a close. The investigation would end with Harlan's arrest. Merritt's role would never be examined. The network he actually runs would continue operating under new management." Wren said from near the door. "He controlled the investigation from inside the oversight structure." "Yes," Holt said. "Where is Merritt now?" Wren moved to his terminal. "He departed the installation at 15:38, ma'am, 22 minutes before the check-in protocol activated." "That is not coincidence," Holt said. "No, ma'am. Someone in the command structure notified him. He knew the window. He knew when to move." Elise held Holt's gaze. "Whoever that is, they are still in position." The implications moved through the room, another layer beneath the layer they had just exposed. Harlan had gone very still. Something had shifted in his face, the controlled fury dissolving into something less defended and considerably more complicated. He looked like a man who had just understood clearly, and for the first time, the full dimensions of the situation he had been inhabiting. "He told me we were protecting national interests," Harlan said. His voice was quieter now, the performance entirely gone. "He said the contractors were filling capability gaps that conventional military channels couldn't address, that the intelligence transfers were authorized at a level above what would appear in standard documentation." He paused. "I believed him. He stopped. He was persuasive," Elise said. "That's what made him useful. That's what made him dangerous." She held Harlan's gaze without anger and without sympathy, with only the precise and steady assessment of someone who has spent 3 months watching a man who had convinced himself his choices were defensible. Holt nodded to the MPs. They moved with the professional efficiency of people who had performed this function before in circumstances that were, if anything, more difficult than these. They read Harlan his rights. They removed his sidearm. They applied the restraints used for flag officers firm enough to be absolute, handled with the formality owed to what the man had been before, what he had done. When they turned him toward the door, Harlan stopped. He looked back at Elise one final time. The performance was entirely gone now. What remained was the face of a man standing in the specific and irreversible moment when the full weight of accumulated choices has arrived. "How long?" he said. "About you specifically." 3 weeks. She held his gaze. About the operation since Afghanistan. Since I woke up in a field hospital and counted the people who didn't wake up with me. She paused. 26 people in 14 months. Each of them served this country with everything they had. Each of them died because someone sold their locations, their routes, their operational timelines for money. A final pause. 2 years officially dead. 3 months watching you confirm exactly who you are. They took him out. The door closed. No one spoke for a moment. The servers hummed. The audit protocol continued its quiet work. Then Holt turned back to the room. We secure what we have before anything else. Full chain of custody documentation on every screen, every log, every transfer record. She looked at Pruitt. You're the senior technical officer in this room. Make it happen. Yes, ma'am. Commander Carver. Holt's voice shifted slightly, the operational register softening at its edges into something more direct. How much more does this show? Elise pulled up the secondary file she had been building in parallel with the primary Harlan documentation, the one she had not transferred to Fort Meade because it was not yet complete, the one that had been assembling quietly in the background for 3 months while the visible investigation proceeded. 16 names appeared across the main screen. Officers across 6 different installations, 4 private contractors, 2 sitting members of Congress whose financial records cross-referenced against the transfer timeline showed payments routed through shell companies that traced with 4 steps of documentation back to the same private military entities that had been receiving the intelligence. All documented, she said. Access patterns, financial transfers, communication intercepts where available. Each connection established through a minimum of 3 independent data points. She paused. It's enough to prosecute, all of it. Holt studied the screen for a long time. One of the generals behind her, the older of the 2 men, the one whose chest of ribbons told the story of a career conducted largely in places that never made the news, said quietly, if we move on all 16 simultaneously before Merritt understands what we have, we lose the network. He has contacts. He has resources. He'll burn what he can and protect what he can't burn. Agreed, Holt said. She looked at Elise. You have a proposal. We use the momentum of this arrest. Let the network believe the investigation closed with Harlan. Watch what Merritt does when he believes he survived it. He'll move to consolidate, contact the remaining nodes, reassure them, possibly shift the financial routing as a precaution. Every move he makes in the next 2 weeks will add documentation we don't currently have. That's a longer operation. Yes, ma'am. Months, potentially. Another identity, another installation. I'm aware of what it requires. Holt was quiet, the kind of quiet that is not indecision, but the compression of a large assessment into the space available for it. 0800 tomorrow, she said. Full operational proposal. Merritt thread command structure. Leak your recommendation for executing Phase 2 without alerting the remaining network. She held Elise's gaze. Tonight you are officially Commander Elise Carver. I'd suggest you remember what that feels like. Elise returned the salute. Callum was waiting near the door. He had positioned himself at the room's edge in the way that Master Chiefs occupy edges present, without intruding, available, without announcing it, carrying the long patience of someone who has learned that the most important things often happen in the margins of the events everyone else is watching. He came to attention when she approached. The salute he gave her was the kind that takes decades to develop, not the precise mechanical correctness of a junior officer demonstrating protocol, but the salute of someone who has performed the gesture in enough circumstances that it has been stripped of performance and reduced to pure meaning. She returned it. Welcome home, Commander, he said. Thank you, Master Chief, for the notebook, for trusting what you observed over what you were told to see. The notebook was just observation. He was quiet for a moment. 6 months I've been watching this installation, wondering if anyone was going to do something about what I was seeing. Turns out someone was. He glanced toward the door through which Harlan had been taken. Turns out someone had been doing something about it from further back than I knew. Your testimony is part of the permanent record. He nodded. I went through Bragg in '84, different program. But I understand what the training costs. And I understand what 3 months of what you went through costs. He looked at her with the directness of someone who considers that quality the highest form of regard. Carry it right. He turned and walked back toward the maintenance log he had kept for 6 months, and she watched him go, and the specific feeling that accompanied watching him was the feeling of having been recognized by someone whose recognition meant something. Foss found her in the corridor 20 minutes later. He had clearly prepared what he was going to say. She could see the preparation in the way he organized himself as he approached. The breath, the straightened posture, the expression of someone who has assembled language for a moment that deserves more than improvisation. Ma'am, he met her eyes, which cost him something visible. I owe you a specific apology, not a general one. He paused. The group chat, the jokes, the 3 months of using every interaction as a performance for people I wanted to impress. None of it was about you. It was about me wanting to look a certain way to people whose opinion I valued more than I should have. Another pause. The officer I want to be would have looked closer instead of performing contempt. I didn't do that. She looked at him for a moment. You found the parallel access pattern when you could have missed it, she said. When missing it would have been easier in every measurable way. You printed it, you came to the holding facility, and you put it in front of me with enough time for it to matter. She let that stand. That's not nothing, Lieutenant. It doesn't undo. No, it doesn't. Nothing does. She held his gaze. But here is what it does. It tells you something about who you are when the performance stops and the decision is real. Most people don't learn that about themselves until it's too late to do anything with the information. She paused. Don't waste what today cost you. Something settled into a different configuration in his face. Not resolved, carrying something now that it hadn't been carrying this morning, but more honest for the weight. Yes, ma'am, he said. She walked on. The room they gave her was in the VIP section of the officer quarters, which was better than the contractor housing unit in every material way, in which she registered in the manner of someone who has been away from normal things long enough to notice them again briefly, without sentiment, setting the observation aside. She sat on the edge of the bed. For 3 months, she had ended each day in a concrete room with a metal frame and a desk that had been surplus since before some of her colleagues were born. She had not minded. Discomfort had never been the hard part. The hard part was the sustained performance of being no one, the daily deliberate erasure of 12 years of identity in service of a necessary invisibility. Tonight, the invisibility was over. She let the full weight of that settle without trying to manage it. 11 people in Afghanistan. The names she had memorized before she ever took the assignment, because she believed the people you were fighting for deserved to be known specifically, not carried as an abstraction. 2 years of official death, of existing in the margins of operational records, of being the kind of person who could not grieve publicly because the public did not know she was alive. 3 months of being treated as furniture by people who had no idea what they were dismissing. And beneath all of it, the man who had handed her this mission, who had designed it as a mechanism for his own protection, who had sent her convoy down a road he had cleared with full knowledge of what was waiting on it. She breathed through it. 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold. Then she picked up the tablet and began writing the report for Holt. The 16 names, the 6 installations, the 4 contractors, the 2 congressmen, the financial transfer records with their documentation chains. All of it organized with the same methodical precision she had applied to everything for 3 months, because exhaustion did not reduce the importance of the work. She sent it at 21:47. Holt's acknowledgement came in 4 minutes, brief as Holt's communications always were received, preserved across 4 servers. Sovereign Ghost Phase 2 authorized. 0800 brief confirmed. Rest Commander. She set the tablet on the bedside table and looked at the watch. 21:52. The small button on the side of the casing was where it had always been. 3 months she had carried it without touching it. Tonight, for the first time, she placed her finger against it. Not pressing, resting, reminding herself that it was still there, that the instrument, was still in her hand, that the choices about when to use it and when to wait remained hers. Then the secure message alert sounded. She did not recognize the sending address. The formatting was correct, the right prefix, the right encryption header, but the origin identifier was a string of characters that did not correspond to any active Sovereign Ghost contact she had established or been briefed on. The subject line read, Tower 4 sends regards. No text, 1 attachment. She opened it. The image was low resolution, taken at distance on equipment that prioritized portability over quality. She recognized the compound immediately, the specific, impermanent recognition of a place where something of consequence happened to you, the kind of recognition that does not require processing. The coordinates in the lower corner confirmed what she already knew. The date stamp read 14 months ago, 2 days before her convoy moved. The image showed the road from elevation, her road, the one Merritt had confirmed clear in the modified threat assessment, the one she had driven down with 11 other people who believed the intelligence they had been given. And on a rooftop in the background, barely resolved against the pale stone and the early morning light, a figure, standing, holding something, too distant to identify, too clearly present to dismiss. A person who had been in that position at that location on that morning with whatever they were holding 2 days before the ambush. A person who had known, a person who had watched, a person who was still in whatever capacity that word now meant somewhere, and who wanted her to know they had been there, not Harlan, not Merritt, someone else. A third layer beneath the two she had just exposed. The person who had coordinated the attack from the outside, who had been in country with advanced knowledge, who had watched the convoy route being established and had said nothing. She did not open a reply. She saved the image to encrypted storage with full chain of custody documentation. She tagged the sending address. She noted the timestamp and the file metadata, and everything the image contained that was visible, and everything it implied that wasn't. Then she set the tablet down. Her finger was still on the button. She took it away. Outside her window, the Hawaiian night had the quality that darkness takes at the edge of the Pacific, not absolute, but layered, resolving on close attention into the graduated distinction between water and sky, and the faint luminescence at the boundary of things. Somewhere beyond that edge, submarines held course and depth in water that concealed them completely. Carrier groups maintained position in the patterns that projected the presence designed to deter what it was designed to deter. Men and women were standing watches in the middle of the ocean, and would continue standing them through the night, trusting that the institution above them was worthy of that trust. Most of it was. She had known going in that not all of it was. She knew it more completely now. The difference between going in and coming out was that now she had names and documentation and a report on Holt's terminal and a case built well enough to stand. She had also found a third layer that she had not been sent to find. That was tomorrow's problem, tomorrow's mission. The brief at 0800 in the operational proposal, and the slow, patient work of following the Tower 4 thread wherever it led into whatever darkness it occupied. Tonight was for this, for Callum's notebook in the chain of custody record, for Foss standing at a secondary terminal in an empty room, staring at a name he could have not found choosing to find it, for Wren's single nod across a control room floor, for the 11 names she carried and would keep carrying with the specific and undiminishing weight of people who deserved to be known. For the salute she had been given in front of everyone who had decided she was nothing, by the people whose assessment was the only one that had ever truly counted. She set her alarm for 4:30, lay back on the bed, closed her eyes, breathed, 4 in slow and steady, hold, 4 out the same, hold. The rhythm that had carried her through the worst of it, that would carry her through whatever came next. Merritt was somewhere in the country tonight, moving through his network, believing he had survived. Tower 4 was somewhere watching, waiting to see whether the reply came. Neither of them understood yet what had happened today or what it meant for what was coming. She slept, and in the morning she would begin again. The memorial wall at Fort Bragg lists names that most people will never know. Some of those names belong to people who died. Some belong to people who were declared dead and are still in whatever capacity the word allows working. The wall does not distinguish between them. Both kinds of absence require the same kind of courage. Both are remembered the same way, quietly, specifically by the people who understood what the name cost.